There's been momentous movements in Iraq, and all the world's press and eyes are on Iraq, and no one is caught everyone off guard and by surprise. So we're hoping you will shed some light on the situation, make it understandable.
Well, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We begin with Allah's blessed name, and the most important thing for analysis at this time, Morris, is to be able to connect the dots. Unless and until you're able to connect the dots, you will not be able to discern the strategy of the master craftsman who is crafting the world order which is now emerging in succession to Pax Americana. The new world order that is emerging in succession to Pax Americana. The master craftsman is doing it with great skill, and one of his stratagems is diversion, to divert attention from here to there, to there, to there, to there. Which is why if you look at the television screen today, and I don't have a television in my home, Morris.
Thank God.
If you look if you look at the television screen, you see that the images keep on changing rapidly. The rapid movement of images on a television screen is in order to be able to block the mind from being able to concentrate and to being able to penetrate into reality, so that you remain someone who is imprisoned in superficiality, in the fleeting moment. That's all you do. You are living and you are imprisoned in the fleeting moment. So if you're able to connect the dots, then and only then can you discern the big picture. And the big picture is that, number one, the master craftsman is hell-bent on fomenting Shia-Sunni civil war. And in order to foment Shia-Sunni civil war, he has to demonize the Shia, so that the Sunni become all revved up for war with the Shia. And that has been going on for some time now. He has to so brutalize the Sunnis that large numbers of young Sunni men will become so filled with anger, so overflowing with anger, that all you have to do is to put some weapons in his hands and tell him go and fight, and he will dance to any tune that you play. So what they did in Libya, and then what they did in Syria, is what they're now doing in Iraq. It's the same master planner at work, the same supplier of weapons. And I want to assure you that this body called themselves ISIL, or that's the French, and ISIS in English, this body of so-called Mujahideen, I want to assure you, Morris, they're not getting their weapons from Santa Claus. No. The same Santa Claus who supplied weapons to them in Benghazi, so that they're able to take over Libya. The same assortment of Santa Clauses who have been supplying them with weapons and training and US dollars for them to wage their bogus jihad in Syria. I am absolutely certain, Morris, that it is the same Santa Claus at work, supplying weapons and supplying training and supplying funds for this, what is now occurring in northern Iraq. And the purpose is, of course, ultimately to serve the cause of the Zionists. The purpose is ultimately to ensure that Israel would have an easier task, an easier fight on her hand to succeed the United States as the next ruling state in the world, to create turmoil and create disorder in the Arab world in particular, to create civil war in the House of Islam. And that's what they're doing in northern Iraq.
Is it not the case that there is also popular support for the uprising in Iraq? ISIS is only a few thousand fighters. It could not possibly be taking over huge towns and cities without local support.
We have someone from northern Iraq sitting with me here now. It appears it's not just a matter of local support, and of course the Sunnis in Iraq would feel a certain amount of grievances over majority Shia rule when they have been ruling over the country for so long. But it is also a conscious decision on the part of the Iraqi government to withdraw the armed forces of Iraq from all of these areas. So there's no fight. ISIS is not defeating them on the battlefield. It is rather that the Iraqi government has decided to withdraw her armed forces from that part of Iraq.
Well, there's been a lot of disquiet from Maliki about the amount of troops that ran, deserted, absconded, and there's a lot of publicity given now to how much is being paid to new volunteers to battle ISIS. But I'd like to make this point that ISIS is only a few thousand fighters. They surely can't just approach a town of a few 100,000 people and overwhelm it within hours, which is what we are witnessing. What I'm saying is there must be Saddam loyalists, Baathists, and various others there supporting them.
There's also the undercurrent of an emerging Shia-Sunni civil war. If ISIS is comprised of Sunni warriors, then they can exploit the underlying Sunni sentiment of discontent with the Shia, which has been playing for some time now. Okay? The mastermind is succeeding, and succeeding dangerously so, in approaching that point when he will succeed eventually in fomenting overall Sunni Shia civil war. In a previous interview, I had mentioned that perhaps behind the scenes there is a second track of negotiations going on with Iran. A secret track of negotiations going on with Iran, where an offer is being made, a plum which is so juicy, that only the best of all can refuse it. And that is for the triumph of the Shia version of Islam over the Sunni. For that triumph of Shia Islam to take place, you have to facilitate the emergence of an Imam al-Mahdi who will be accepted in Mecca. In order for Mecca to accept the Imam al-Mahdi, Mecca has to be under Shia rule. How can Mecca be under the Shia rule without some kind of very astute diplomacy with Iran and very astute military planning, with a number of people facilitating a movement towards Iran taking over Mecca. I don't want to speak any more on this Mecca. I just want to leave the dots for those who have the intelligence to be able to connect the dots. This is a possible scenario being negotiated secretly, and hopefully we pray that Shia Iran will not fall into that trap.
So your suggestion is NATO may turn on Saudi Arabia. One wonders if NATO is not bombing ISIS at this moment, if it is Saudi Arabian pressure that's stopping America from bombing ISIS and her allies.
Why should NATO, why should the United States be bombing ISIS except as camouflage, when ISIS is doing the work that the Zionists want ISIS to do?
Nevertheless, they have tremendous support from Saudi Arabia, and I just wonder how much Saudi Arabian influence there might be on American foreign policy in the area.
Isn't Saudi Arabia a Zionist state? Isn't Saudi Arabia dancing to the tunes of a Zionist drum beater from day one? Okay? There's a falling out now, because Saudi Arabia is seeing the United States cozying up to Iran. Okay?
Yes.
And maybe a betrayal of the Saudis. That's in the cards. But ISIS is dancing to a Zionist drumbeat without any doubt at all, because it identifies itself in a very strange way. It doesn't identify itself as a revolutionary movement. Morris, it identifies itself as an Islamic state. Why would you identify yourself as an Islamic state when the only way that an authentic Islamic movement of liberation can establish an authentic Islamic state is if you make a claim to the restoration of the caliphate or the khilafah? Well, very clearly you don't need a PhD to know that that's in the cards. And it's going to be a bogus caliphate, a bogus khilafah. If they want to fall for that trap, that's their choice, not ours. We can see ahead of us, we can connect the dots, and we can discern very clearly that the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, is heading towards a goal of an Islamic State in which they will claim to restore the Khilafah or the Caliphate. And we are saying up front, before they achieve it, that it'll be as bogus a Caliphate as the paper money that we're now using as money.
You know, in Syria, there's been alarm bells for a long time about this ISIS group as being even more extreme than the other groups. And so people that are supporting the Bashar Assad government are very much, they want to attack ISIS in all ways. And the problem is, I'm worried they're going to be duped. And America is, at some point, going to start to bomb ISIS in Syria. In other words, America's is it preparing to re-penetrate the Middle East? Is it about to reoccupy the Middle East or re-destroy it?
There appears to me, Morris, to be evidence in our eschatological data. Sorry for using such technical language. Islamic eschatology envisages or anticipates precisely that a new Western military presence in the Arab world, when they're going to land, as the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wasalam, in the area north of Damascus, where a big war is going to be fought. So yes, they're preparing for that Western intervention, military intervention. But a Western bombing of ISIS, I think it's only going to be window dressing, like an Israeli attack on Iranian nuclear plants will be only window dressing, meant to provoke Iran into a military response that will be which will entirely meet the approval of Israel.
We're all being manipulated. The Zionists have outsmarted everyone for centuries, it seems.
Yeah.
So I'm afraid that we're using ISIS as a caricature, and it's not reflecting the reality on the ground. I'm repeating myself, but there's a lot of Baathists, Saddam loyalists. There's been a lot of injustice to the Sunnis in Iraq. They're taken off the streets, they're put in prison, they're never tried, they're locked up for years. There are many accounts of these types of stories. So I'm worried that we're all focusing on ISIS when in fact ISIS is actually a small part of the picture.
The support that you speak of was deliberately and carefully cultivated. They created it so that they could exploit it the way they're now exploiting it. You don't need a PhD to understand that.
Yes.
The same thing happened in Egypt. They created the sea of discontent through their manipulation of money, the banking system, the monetary system, the economic hardship. They created it, they cultivated it, and then they exploited it in the Arab Spring. You don't need a PhD to understand that.
The role of Turkey in this situation, it would seem there's more and more voices of opposition growing within Turkey saying, look, your foreign policy is leading to disaster. Even calls for the government to resign in Turkey. Do you think Turkey may alter course, given its experience here of the consul general being taken, diplomatic staff being taken hostage, etc.? And it's sort of supported ISIS somewhat as well. It's not even a banned organization in Turkey.
The Ottoman so-called Islamic State, had a PhD in its bogus support of the Sunni cause. In its bogus support for the Sunni cause, in the Sunni Shia rivalry, the Ottoman state waged bogus jihad against the Shia for centuries in order to keep the Shia-Sunni rivalry and hatred burning very fiercely. And modern day Turkey, which aspires to be the successor of that Ottoman so-called Islamic State, would therefore be true to its antecedents in again supporting such a cause that would stoke Sunni Shia civil war. What ISIS is doing is precisely that, creating conditions which will force Iran and force Shia Iraq to respond militarily. And as Shia Iran and Shia Iraq respond militarily, then the Sunnis around the world will come to the rescue. And you're going to have it. That's what they wanted, and that's what they now get. Sunni Shia civil war. But the last nail in the coffin, so to say, would be to provoke Iran into attacking Saudi Arabia. And then to facilitate the way they facilitated Mustafa Kemal in, what is the name of that place where they landed in Turkey in 1919? Come on, Morris, help me.
I'm sorry, I don't know, but I know Ataturk made a big mark on Turkey, and people say his origins are dubious as well.
The British and the French Western troops landed on the Turkish coast, and then Mustafa Kemal became a hero overnight when they conveniently allowed him to defeat them. All right?
Yes.
So the same thing has to happen. That what would appear to be, and I hope it does not happen. I hope the Iranian leadership will listen to me. That a miraculous Iranian military advance into Saudi Arabia, which when you look underneath, it's not going to be so miraculous at all because it's going to be facilitated. An Iranian military attack on Saudi Arabia in consequence of an Israeli attack on Iran, and then Iran responds by taking Bahrain, and then across the causeway into Saudi Arabia, on the road to Mecca. That is what they want. because that's going to be the last nail in the coffin, ensuring Sunni Shia civil war. What ISIS is doing is playing into their hands, giving them precisely that Sunni Shia civil war that they want. Secondly, ISIS is playing into their hands because you can close your eyes and see what's the plan. The plan is to create an Islamic state, a bogus Islamic state, a Zionist Islamic state. And that Islamic state will claim to recover the Khilafah or the Caliphate, the Sunni Caliphate. You can see in advance this is what they're planning. But it cannot be a real Caliphate. No. It's going to be a bogus Caliphate. And I'm saying that up front.
All the reports I see say ISIS has 10,000 fighters in Syria and Iraq. That is not a large amount of people, and certainly not to be conquering huge swathes of territory. I think we're also being manipulated to think they're a greater power than they are. They've taken over Mosul of millions of people. They've taken over towns of hundreds of thousands of people. They can't spread themselves that thin. It's not possible that they're such a big force.
I think the name of the town is Mosul.
Okay.
Mosul, yeah. And I think that we have to ask, why has the Iraqi armed forces withdrawn? So you don't have a fight to the finish. It's not a case of they taking over. It is a case of they replacing the Iraqi armed forces. When the Iraqi armed forces withdrew, why are they withdrawing? I can't answer that question, Maurice. I don't know why they're withdrawing. Maybe you can find out from someone else. Why have the Iraqi armed forces withdrawn?
Well, Maliki seems to have failed miserably as a unifying force in Iraq. It seems he's lost the support of Iran, the United States, and absolutely everyone. He has misplayed some cards.
You cannot unite Iraq in the same way that you cannot reunite Ukraine if you follow the Shia foreign policy of the Maliki government, or you follow the foreign policy and the domestic policies of the present people who sit in Kiev. You have to build a plural model of a state for a plural polity. Putin, to his credit, and Russia, to its credit, has been asking for precisely that, to negotiate a federal agreement. I don't call it federal, I call it a plural model of a state for Ukraine, because it's not a homogeneous society. It's not a homogeneous polity. This is what our Prophet, Allah's blessings be upon him, did when he went to Medina. He found a polity which was comprised of heterogeneous units. There were Jewish tribes, some of which were locked in war with each other. And there were pagan Arab tribes. And then you had people who had migrated from Mecca. So you had three big groups of people. One, the Muslims. Number two, the pagan Arabs. And number three, the Jews. And he patiently negotiated over a period of 7 months a constitutional agreement with which he was able to create a plural model of a state in which the individual was not the unit of the state, but rather the different groups which were heterogeneous. Ukraine is not a homogeneous society, and not a homogeneous polity. And the fools who now hold power in Kiev are unwilling to accept that. Similarly with Shia foreign policy in Iraq. Iraq is not a homogeneous polity. Iraq is very clearly divided into several different main groups. amongst which the biggest is the Shia-Sunni divide, but that's not the only one. You have the Arab-Kurdish divide, okay? And so what you need is a constitutional agreement which will bring into being a plural model of a state. But Shia political thought cannot admit that. No, sir. So Maliki Shia Iraq cannot but fail. So if there is substantial Sunni support for the rebellion in the north, which is parading itself under the bogus name of ISIS, it is because the model of a state which has come to Iraq is one which cannot accommodate its heterogeneous polity.
Do you feel that a solution may be just dismembering Iraq, that it no longer remains one country as we know it?
That is already decided upon, not just for Iraq. They want to do the same thing with Egypt. They want to do the same thing with Saudi Arabia. It is part and parcel of the master plan for establishing Israeli political and economic dominance or dominion over the entire Arab world. You got to break them up into bits and pieces. That's the master plan for Pakistan as well.
So might we see 3 different countries emerging out of Iraq in the years ahead?
Like Somalia today, like Libya is already disintegrating, okay, into different warring factions which may not even be called states. It's mayhem, it's disorder, and that's what they want. Facilitate Israel in her effort to try to succeed the United States of America in establishing Pax Judaica, which will replace Pax Americana.
And to finish off, to return to Iraq for 1 second, where is this leading to? Is there any light at the end of the tunnel? Do you just see a Shia-Sunni civil war only?
I hope and I pray that there are sufficient people in the world today who have the capacity to connect the dots and to discern or to understand the strategy of the Zionists, and therefore to take appropriate action in order to forestall or to prevent the emergence of that universal Sunni Shia war. I can only pray for that. Whether or not they will succeed in bringing about Sunni Shia civil war in the world of Islam, I really do not know whether this will succeed. But unfortunately, the wind seems to be blowing in that direction.
I guess it's only natural that Saudi Arabia should have gained so much influence in Iraq when there was such a vacuum and probably so much injustice. The Americans had sown the injustice to begin with.
Yeah, well, we covered that subject already.
Okay.
You sow the seeds of discontent and then you exploit it to your advantage. You sow the seeds of discontent and then you exploit it to your advantage.